What is the ultimate legacy of the Ultimate Marvel Universe? Hi, I'm Jason Inman.
And I'm Ashley Victoria Robinson.
And we are here to answer that nerdy question because that's what we do on this channel. We answer nerdy questions, especially questions that come from our Patreon, patreon.com/Jawiin. So if you want to get your question answered, go over there to the producer level, and we will answer your question, give you a shout out like
RAE MYERS!
RAE MYERS, that's right, who has the best wall sticking skills I have ever seen in North America. I'm not kidding you. There's a guy in Europe that's a little bit better than RAE MYERS, but RAE MYERS is the best in North America.
Cool.
So we are answering his question.
Her question?
Her question, excuse me, my bad. Ashley, what's the question?
Her question is, what is the impact of the Marvel Ultimate Universe?
Okay, let's talk about this. This is very interesting. Now, we've talked a little bit about this in previous videos about the best alternate Marvel universes. I am a huge fan of the Ultimate Marvel Universe. It really brought me back into Spider-Man. I love Ultimate Spider-Man. I think it's one of the best Marvel comic books ever published. The first 100 issues of Ultimate X-Men is great. The first 30 issues of Ultimate Fantastic Four is really solid, and the Ultimates Volume 1 and 2 are some of the best comic books that have ever been made. To me, there are two big impacts, and I'm going to state them right now, and then we can circle back because there's a lot to unpack here. The two biggest impacts and legacy of the Ultimate Marvel Universe is the Marvel Cinematic Universe, especially the Avengers, and Miles Morales' Spider-Verse. So I want to go to the MCU first. We would not, Avengers #1 takes so many things from the Ultimates comic book.
I mean, Nick Fury,
Captain America, how he acts, his costume comes from there.
Hill.
You know, I would even say a lot of the jokey Tony comes from there, and the way Thor acts come from there. There's a lot. I would say modern Hawkeye owes everything to Ultimate Hawkeye. That's the way that Hawkeye acts. Do you disagree with? I mean, are there any other legacies? I mean, do you want to unpack Marvel? Where do you want to go on this, Ashley? Is what I'm
Jesus.
asking.
I mean, Miles is a good jumping off point as well. But I think more than Miles, the legacy of the Ultimate Universe is it allowed Marvel a comfort level to play in a multiverse. Marvel had a multiverse before that, but they didn't take advantage of it as well as DC had previously. And then because Ultimates really served to modernize them in a time where they really needed fresh new ideas.
That's a good idea.
It made it okay for them to explore other things. Like, because of the success of the Ultimate Universe, we have things now like Spider-Verse, like Spider-Gwen. We have more versions of Secret Wars. Like, so much of what modern Marvel comics are right now are directly related to this reboot.
I think you're right. We should probably back up a little bit. If you don't know what Ultimate Marvel Universe is, it was this imprint that was made in Marvel in 2000, and the whole marching orders for the original line was, what if Stan Lee and Jack Kirby created these characters in 2000?
Yeah.
Mark Miller wrote Ultimate X-Men, Brian Michael Bendis wrote Spider-Man, and then they divvied up basically everything else with some other people like Warren Ellis and whatever. So I think you're correct, because I think the Ultimate Marvel Universe showed Marvel creators that they could not be so precious with these characters. Like, Wolverine has a soul patch? Great. Sabretooth has Wolverine claws? Cool. The Green Goblin is actually a monster, not just a dude with the mask? Awesome.
I mean, we still wind up going around and doing the same trends because this is comics and it eats its own tail.
It does.
Magneto ultimately winds up being the bad guy again. But there are some really standout moments where they do stretch characterizations, like the Hulk eats people.
Yes.
Which is something that you were like, yeah, of course he would.
Well, and also I love the idea that the Ultimates does where when Thor shows up on Earth, nobody believes that he's a god.
No, they think he's like a weird drunk.
They just think he's a drunk
Swedish
hippie.
guy.
They think he's lying.
Yeah, I think he's like a cult leader for a little while.
He is. He's just a guy that drinks in Norway, and they're just like.
And they leave you for a while in this space where you have to decide if you think he's Thor or not. But I mean, the greatest legacy is the MCU.
Yes.
Because just tonally, that source material is closer to what we're used to seeing in a modern action movie or a modern James Bond, for example, compared to the original 1960s source material.
Yeah,
it's much more accessible.
It owes way more to the MCU. The MCU owes everything, all the success, and a lot of its storyline. Because they've taken the storylines from the more modern Marvel universe, but all these storylines that they've been taking are post Ultimate Marvel.
Yeah. We get a lot of great costumes that came out of that era as well, or like updates to costumes that we are more familiar with. We also get really bad things, like the Fan Four Stick movie was supposedly inspired by the Ultimate FF. I've never read Ultimate FF, so I can't speak to it.
So good.
But so I mean, not all that glitters is gold. Some of it's just a shiny turd. But
the first 40 issues of Ultimate FF are great. Now, the first arc is weird, but that is the Ultimate Fantastic Four. They get their powers because they open a portal to the negative zone. They call it the end zone. And Victor is the whole Baxter building being a think tank. They call it the Future Foundation or the Baxter Foundation. That is from the Ultimate FF, and Victor is one of the other people in that. And he gets powers as well. He turns into this metallic doom-like monster, is what he turns into. There's some great stuff in it. Also, you know, there's one big legacy about the Marvel Universe, the Ultimate Marvel Universe, that we forget. The Ultimate Marvel Universe is responsible for Marvel Zombies. That is a storyline that was introduced in the Ultimate Fantastic Four, by Mark Miller in like the 20s or whatever, because there's this storyline where Reed opens up this portal and he talks to what we think is 616, the regular Marvel Universe Reed, and he's like, oh yeah, I have a daughter, I have a son, I'm doing all this stuff like that, and then the twist of the end of that issue is that regular Reed turns off the portal and then you see that he's a zombie. And so that was the first time that the Marvel Zombies, and they made like, God, I think like 10 miniseries of Marvel Zombies.
Oh, did they? I don't know anything about Marvel Zombies. I didn't know that they were popular enough that you would.
They were. The first miniseries of Marvel Zombies is actually really good. The rest of them are not great. But no, they made a lot of Marvel Zombies miniseries, actually.
I mean, the Ultimates is the one thing in modern comics for Marvel that I think you can point to and be like, that was a real turning point.
Yep.
Not just an event for, like, more than, again, Secret Wars or Civil War II.
Growing these characters up.
Yeah, and, like, changing the way we could tell stories about them.
I will tell you this. I still, to this day, recommend Ultimate Spider-Man as an excellent jumping on point for anybody that wants to read Spider-Man, because you don't need to know anything. And I would also say the same thing about Ultimate X-Men. I would be like, yeah, go read that Ultimate X-Men.
When I worked at the shop and people wanted Avengers stories, Ultimates was always a really great go-to. And then you go only the first 2 volumes and don't read about the rest of it.
Don't read 3 and don't.
It gets gross.
Yeah, and don't read 4, and then don't read where, like, oh man, they just start fighting vampires for no reason. It's just really good. Bad. Let's talk about this. Okay, so the Ultimate Marvel Universe doesn't exist anymore. They basically they killed it off. Whereas I still believe that they should have left Miles Morales in that other universe, just like Spider-Verse did, and just called the title Ultimate Spider-Man and left him going. Because when you bring Miles to the regular Marvel Universe, to me, he doesn't work. So, actually, the Ultimate Marvel Universe failed. It collapsed. They did this event called Cataclysm, which basically had Magneto turn the world, and the world flood. Now, this is what happens to a lot of times in comic book companies. They have separate imprints, and there's a certain point that whenever they feel that the imprint is going stale, they'll introduce a post-apocalyptic event. And that'll change the world and do this stuff. So they did that for the Ultimate Universe, and they flooded like North America because Magneto turned the poles. And in this, a bunch of the characters got killed, like Cyclops died, stuff like that. The mutants moved to New Mexico for no reason. The Ultimates had to pick up the pieces, and then Ultimate Spider-Man just went on like nothing changed. And then they did another event like a year later to try to bring it back again, and it was another one of these post-apocalyptic BS events. But actually, why do you think, and I know you haven't read as much of the Ultimate Universe as I have, why do you think the Ultimate Universe eventually collapsed? Because it was so good and so strong for so long.
Because it just, I alluded to this earlier, it just wound up being the same as the 616, just with different costumes. Magneto was still evil, the Avengers still had to do this. Like, ultimately, in the end, we were just dressing up the same stories that we already know.
They were, and they were just slight changes.
If you're just doing that and you're being derivative and you're being reductive and you're not being inventive, then no one's going to buy it, and that's what happened. Those books didn't sell, so they canceled the universe.
I think the only consistent seller at the very end was still Ultimate Spider-Man.
Was Ultimate Spider-Man. I think it's really funny that they kept, they call it Cataclysm, because that's also the name of a DC event that predates it.
Batman Cataclysm, yeah.
What I think is weird...
There's only so many names.
...is that nobody thought enough about it, or the right people weren't making this decision of, we can leave Miles here and that will be okay. Like we weren't ready to just, like, cancel those books and just let Spider-Man be that. Like, no, we had to just wipe the whole thing
Yeah.
out. I think that is very, very strange because we cancel books all the time.
Mm-hmm.
Like, Silk has been canceled for a couple of years now, and we just assume she's around somewhere and we don't see her, or she shows up when she shows up.
Yeah.
You know, like, to me, that's treating your fans like they're stupid.
Mm-hmm.
So, like, well, if they're not publishing Ultimate Fantastic Four, what's happening? And it's like, they're doing stuff.
Yeah.
Whatever. And I agree with you because I don't think Miles is as impactful in the 616.
He only works with Peter Parker's death.
He only works with Peter Parker died as a young man.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. But
And I think something that even Spider-Verse made that point.
Yes.
Miles needs to be separate to work.
yeah.
To have the impact.
Yeah.
Because they basically did his origin story, almost, except for the more Spider people.
But I'm gonna call it right now. I give it 5 years before we get Ultimate Rebirth. They'll bring back that universe. Miles will science that universe back open.
Hold on, I'm preparing my resume.
Call CB Cebulski and tell him I got his back.
I would do anything to write Ultimate Marvel. I want to write that more than regular
but
Marvel.
I don't think.
No, it'll come back.
I don't think they'll leave it closed.
No, I agree. Yeah, I agree with you. I think they lost what made it special. And at its point, like, you were just retelling the other stories at a certain point. But what they did is they compressed a lot of stuff way too fast. Whereas to me, I'm like, man, if you're going to do this, and I get that you're, like, updating the stuff, well, then slow down. Like, take the first 200 issues of Spider-Man and tell that over 100 issues. Like, slow that down a little bit.
Ultimate Marvel and the Ultimates title specifically is an excellent example of this. Also sometimes took it too far.
Yeah.
Like, there's an example where the Wasp in that universe is an actual wasp, right? She has wings
She's
that are
mutant.
attached to her body.
Yeah.
And you're like, cool. And then they made her lay eggs the way bugs lay eggs.
A little much.
That's not cool.
But actually, it's ultimate.
I don't care. I don't come to an Avengers brand for body horror. You know what I mean?
Well, also in Cataclysm, they had the Blob eat Janet Van Dyne.
Yeah,
like he chewed her in
do.
half, and then Hank ate him.
And Hank also tries to kill her, but they do Janet
Dirty.
It's such an interesting version of
Janet
her,
goes
but
dirty,
they do her so dirty. So the Ultimates also, again, sort of became this metaphor of like the snake eating its own tail, where they were like, this is the Xbox Extreme Generation. But it's that corporate...
Wolverine has a soul patch.
It's that corporate thing of like, 50-year-old people who aren't in that demographic trying to lead those consumers to them. And I think it also went too far in some points.
I'm going to say this. The ultimate legacy of the Ultimate Marvel Universe is that without the Ultimate Universe, there's a lot of times where people talk about what is the best period of certain companies. And I say, for me, Marvel's best period was the early 2000s. Because that's where we got Grant Morrison X-Men, we got the Ultimate Universe, Brubaker starting Winter Soldier.
So good.
Matt Fraction has Iron Man, which is a great run. We get the Marvel Max line, which creates Punisher, the Garth Ennis Punisher, which is really good. The Straczynski Thor happens during this period. There's a lot, and this is also the Brian Michael Bendis New Avengers.
Yep.
So all of this is happening in this one period. And I think the J. Michael Straczynski Spider-Man's happening during this time
yes,
as well.
it is, which is not as good.
but Dan Slott starts on Spider-Man during this time. So the Ultimate Universe, I think, did show that we don't have to be so precious. We can push some of these characters out of their boxes. And I think without the Ultimate Marvel Universe, we would not have had as great or as creative 2000s Marvel as we had. And I also think that the movies would not be as strong without basically Ultimates being like, this is how you do an Avengers movie.
Yeah.
So, any other thoughts?
No, I agree with that.
All right. Well, RAE MYERS, thank you so much for your amazing wall sticking ability. The best in New
Mexico?
I wanted to call it New America.
Sure.
So it's like well, she is the best in New Mexico. I can guarantee you that, but she's not. She's the best in North America. But I'm telling you, there's a guy in France who's really good. You should look him up sometime. But thank you so much for that question. Go to patreon.com/Jawiin if you want to get your question answered, just like RAE MYERS, in a very long and convoluted and nerdy way. Go down in the comments, tell us what you think your thoughts on the Marvel Universe are, the Ultimate Marvel Universe. While you're down there, click subscribe.
And check out patreon.com/Jawiin for this and more exclusive geeky content.
Thwip, thwip.